Welcome to the Bookbibuli podcast. And today we have with us Reema Ahmad. Reema is an author, poet, NLP based life coach, and mental space psychologist. So, welcome, Reema. Neuro linguistic programming master practitioner. Whoa, confession there. I felt like I need a course to understand your work and training. I was totally clueless. For me, the names of the fields you specialize in are difficult enough to evade the course totally. Please explain before I die of the complex.
First of all, thank you so much, Richa, for this opportunity. Thank you, Bookbibuli. I've admired the work that you do for children and the kind of love that you foster for books in children, and it's just nothing short of amazing. So, yeah, you don't need to feel confused or have a complex about my work. It is not all that complicated, although it does have, fancy terminology. So, to break down the two major components of my work for you, the first, of course, is neuro linguistic programming. So, and short for it is NLP. And simplest way to understand it is that modern psychiatry and psychology, it tries to, when I say modern, of course, it's about 150 to 100 years old, but that is still considered modern. It tries to typify human behavior and say, okay, this person has that disorder, this person has that disorder. Whereas these alternative fields, of which NLP is a part, tries to understand subjective human behavior through their context, a person's context, and how that person arranges information in the brain. So neurolinguistics, specifically, it works through language patterns to understand the human mind through a person's specific language patterns, how memory is organized, how information is organized in the brain. And when we use that, we can change a lot, we can remove a lot of stuff that is not helping us. For example, if someone has an unhelpful belief, we can work around that. If someone has a specific memory, we can work around that. So, things like that. So, it's a different way of understanding human behavior without necessarily typifying it or labeling it as a disease. Mental space psychology is a relatively new field. There are very few practitioners in India. And mental space psychology works on the principle that thoughts, memories, people, events, everything has a spatial place, has a certain space in the way that our thoughts are organized, or in our mental space. So in our mental space, things are organized a certain way, and when we play around with that through movement, mental space psychology has movement as a big part of its component. We can change the way certain things affect us. It's a very powerful tool. It's a very powerful, science, so to speak. And I have had great changes happen to me through that. I've witnessed a lot of beautiful, beautiful changes happen to clients through that. It's very playful. So yeah, that's a little bit about. These are some of the components that I use in my work. There are others also, like metaphor healing and complexity and so much more.
Well, that makes it easier to understand. What would you say, Reema? How ready are our children for Posh? With the kind of books with characters being gender fluid or neutral, which claim there is no gender or everything has a different gender. Are we really helping our children, or are we just confusing them?
That's a very challenging question, Richa, also because it's so tricky to answer it in a way where it doesn't offend people. But I'm going to be honest here with you and answer it through my subjective experience, both as a mother and as a practitioner. Our children are, I'd say, very ready for Posh. Because they are already overexposed to a lot of information through media. There's a lot of information coming in from every channel that they are exposed to, and you cannot ban that information coming in. It will find its way into your homes, right? So I think they are ready for Posh in a way where if it is taught in a child appropriate way and through the lens of awareness and power, and not through the lens of fear, where okay, these threats exist and all of these, stranger dangers and all of these things exist. So you can teach body safety, which essentially is what Posh is talking about at a more adult level, in a way where it doesn't frighten children but it empowers them. Yeah, which is how I've attempted to do that, or through my work with Candidly earlier, we attempted to do that. A lot of other organizations are doing that. So if it is done in this way, I'd say kids are ready, as even as young as 2 or 3, they are ready to understand in an age appropriate, safe way on how to protect themselves. And as they grow older, you can modulate that language, you can add more information that is needed, you can add more details that are needed, you can start bringing in things about consent, you can start talking about body image and bullying and safe behaviors, unsafe behaviors, so many things. So posh is maybe not the right term for it. We call it a comprehensive sexuality education, and kids need that. They need that to have a healthy life, to have healthy, balanced relationships. But yes, when you say with the kinds of books and characters being gender fluid, neutral, and a lot of people claiming that there is no gender or that everything has a gender, it can be very confusing for children. And I personally do not feel the need for very young children, say under the ages of 6 or 7, even 8, if you look at it from my perspective, to be told a lot about sexuality or orientation, in the sense that you can talk about inclusion and diversity without necessarily making it about sexual orientation, which is where a lot of confusion comes in for children, right? Am I gay? Am I bi? Am I heterosexual? What am I? And all of this confusion has a place naturally when kids are growing up and they enter their adolescent years and their teen years. These curiosities will come about naturally. The problem with labeling, I feel, is that it gives too much information before the children are ready for that sort of exploration on their own, and sometimes it can confuse kids also. That said, I think after the ages of say 12 or 13, it is okay to talk about sexual orientation, and one can talk about gender through gender roles. That all kinds of work is okay for men and women, that opportunities are available for both men and women, or that one can have different kinds of families. So the thing that I'm driving at is that it is not necessary to talk about sexual orientation from a very, very young age, but it has to be brought up say around ages 12 or 13, because our context is such that we cannot escape it. And also children do have a right to explore, to be curious and to read, and also to not be judgmental towards others and themselves. Not a very straightforward answer, but then it's not a very straightforward issue. Of course, there are people who insist that we talk about gender and sexuality orientation from a very young age, but I feel like that really muddles up children's understanding of how are they developing before they're ready to absorb those ideas.
Thank you for putting this in perspective. I think this would benefit us all. Let us come to another kind of taboo topic of domestic violence. There are two types of households children live in, and both exist as non overlapping universes. One who witness domestic abuse, and the other who are totally oblivious to it. Do you think we can do something, or I would better say, what can we do to prepare our next generation to handle this better and influence its eradication?
Oh, this is such a beautiful question, Richa. What can we do? What can we do to prepare our next generation to handle this better and influence its eradication? I think this is such a misunderstood, I wouldn't say misunderstood, but not entirely understood, the concept of domestic abuse. When one thinks about abuse, one tends to think about only violence, and that too only violence that is perpetrated on women through men. But violence exists in so many forms. Violence is also passive aggression. Withdrawal is also a kind of violence. Inflicting silence and non-communication is also a kind of violence. And all of these kinds of violence, they exist in the domestic spheres, not through just the husband-wife, the man-woman heterosexual relationship, but through the spectrum of so many relationships, in the parents' relationship with the children, in the children's relationship with whoever our help is or our driver is, our cleaner is. And it also plays out in the way that economics is set up, right? In the way class is set up, in the way race is set up. It is all pervasive in that sense. Domestic violence is all pervasive. And it is so much more about power than it is just about gender. Of course, gender is a big part of it. So, what we can do to prepare our children is to first bring to our own awareness of, do we understand violence? Do we understand violence in its subtlety? And of course, that doesn't mean that you read a book and that you have that awareness and that knowledge. It takes a long time to bring to your own awareness or to accept to even yourself that this kind of, for example, generational and familial violence have existed and continue to exist even when you can have reasonable relationships with people. Right? Say, for example, your elderly parents, and there are some aspects which are still maybe emotionally violent. So that's also violence, right? It's hard to say these things aloud. It's hard to accept them for what they are. But I think if we make that attempt through awareness, through teaching ourselves, and there is no dearth of resources now, there is so much more that we can prevent from happening unconsciously. A lot of violence is passed on in families unconsciously. For example, the way we do discipline in our households is very emotionally and physically violent to our children. But we have been doing that because that is how we were trained, right? And unless we recognize where this comes from, this kind of power tussle, we are in danger of inflicting the same thing in different ways to our children, right? And when we stop that, we prepare our children to understand this better, to know that there are other ways available of having conversations, of doing conflicts in the household and in families, and that changes that whole cycle. So you can't teach this through, say a course or a book. It can be an opening, it can be a teaching window, but the change or awareness for children has to come through action in families, noticeable action and dialogue in families. And I think, given our context, that's not easy. But considering where the world is going, I don't think we have an option left. We really owe this to our children to at least make an attempt.
Yes, you're absolutely right. We owe it to our children. Now let's have a no spoiler alert and let's have a candid on candidly.
Candid on candidly. Candidly was and continues to be a very beautiful part of my life. So, candidly began with two mothers, confused moms who were grappling with the way the, world has rapidly changed in the last 10, 15 years. And we were bringing up, so this is way back in 2016. I began candidly with my dear friend Amita Malhotra from college. We've known each other for over 20 years. So she had a really young daughter back then, and Imad was, I think, 6 or 7, maybe more. Sorry, my memory is fuzzy right now. And both of us were seeing how media, especially, is influencing culture and is influencing the way that, for example, our children can buy toys or can buy, clothes. Everything was so pink and blue-eyed, and it still is. There's a very distinct, aisles for clothes, and there are aisles for, toys. And it's not just about books and toys. It goes on to behavior as well. And then the way that sex is spoken about, or the way that abuse is spoken about, and, how there's so much hush-hush. And we really started candidly as a platform where we could talk about these things without judgment and without fear. And that was the beauty and continues to be the beauty of Candidly in both our works, which has diversified now since the pandemic, but that we bring in a sense of lightness to topics that are formidable, that are serious, that and not taking away from their seriousness in that sense, their gravity in that sense, but trying to bring about this curiosity and sense of empowerment, and not fear, not hopelessness when we talk about these things, because that can be very daunting for a lot of people. It prevents people from actually wanting to know more. So, when you bring in a touch of playfulness in your workshops or in the work that you're doing, so we made this very cute series called Awkward 101, and it talks about awkward questions that kids ask. It was based entirely on GIFs. It was Amita's idea, and it came out beautifully. It's very playful, but it handles these very serious, awkward questions that kids have, like where do babies come from, or why do adults kiss, and why are men's underwear different from women's panties, and things like that. So that was the thing about Candidly. It was cheeky, it was fun, but it was also serious, and it was a very big part of both Amita's journey and my journey. But then over time we realized that being in different cities, we're not able to contribute, and our work was also changing individually. So Candidly still exists, but it's not as active as it used to be.
What an amazing concept. The next one is a little difficult, not for the inquiry, but because of the position it requires, that viewpoint in space. It is not easy to be non partisan. Um, so, how would you say that parenting has changed from the last generation? And would you think, in your perspective, is it for the good?
Yeah, this is definitely not an easy question. And yeah, you're right, more so because of the position it requires. So I tend to look at things through the lens of complexity and time, and it really helps me to look at both perspectives, or the many perspectives of, say, any single story. So, to ask, has parenting changed for the good or for the worse from, maybe say our generation when we were little and our parents were parenting us, I'd say it's a very simplified view of looking at things, and the reality is a lot more complex. In some ways, parenting has changed for the good. For example, in ways that parents now communicate to children, and how warmth and friendliness is an effort that parents, say, of your generation or my generation, or other people, like Sahana, who you interviewed recently, and the kind of equation they're building, or the kind of equation that I'm building with my son. There is a warmth, there is an openness, there is a camaraderie, there is this sense of, okay, let's explore this together. And that element of fun, I think, was to a large extent missing in our parents' generation, or in the way that we were parented. There was a whole lot of authority, and there was a whole lot of fear as well, and there was this fear of consequences. And that is, that change is good. That change has opened up a lot more room for friendship, especially as families grow more and more nuclear, and in a way also isolated, because traditional social structures and communities are breaking down, especially post pandemic, and communities now exist in different shapes and forms. And it is important that parents then become that safe space, that warm space for children. But I'd say that there are also disadvantages. For example, it's so much harder to have boundaries with children, especially teenagers, because we are their friends, right? Because we have been open to them and warm to them. There is that much more fluid space where we are trying to keep them safe from things that we know are not good for them. But because we have given them the space to explore, they are that much more exposed to a whole lot of stuff they may not be prepared for. For example, drinking, or the dark side of dating, or the dark side of social media, which is so complex. It's never as simple as you teach your kids safe ways to behave in, say, in romantic relationships. That does not mean that they will not experiment or push boundaries, or that they will not be on the receiving end of unsafe behavior, right? Because you cannot regulate the world even if you teach your child. And for teenagers, the natural tendency is to push boundaries, is to explore quote unquote the forbidden. We've all gone through that space. No matter how much you prepare children, and this is something that I am knowing now as my kid is almost 17, is that no matter how much you prepare them and how much you tell them, they will take risks. And when this happens, I feel, as I'm now discovering, that a little bit of the old fashioned disciplining, where our parents were really strict about certain things, that, for example, if you do this, then this privilege is taken away, is needed. Otherwise, there is just chaos, because kids are not prepared for the fallout of, vaping, for example, has become such a thing in schools. And vaping is extremely dangerous. You get addicted to it really quickly, but it is considered to be this social thing that teenagers are doing. And you'd be surprised at how common, vaping and smoking up and smoking and alcohol consumption and all sorts of risky sexual behavior is. And if you are not stern around certain things that can be damaging to children, you are really not being fair to them. So in a long-winded way, there is no right way and no wrong way. The way is to parent according to what is needed right now in our context in time. And that is a tricky thing to know, because sometimes you only understand and know things in retrospect. For example, now I'm discovering that I was a little lax with media rules in my household because I thought I was teaching him better, but it has had a neurological impact. It has had an impact on, say, concentration. So now my perspective on media has changed. It's gone to sea change. And these are things that you're learning as you go along. And you discover that maybe parenting is a mix of the old and the new, and that is what our children need. So in that sense, both are relevant. I don't think that entirely everything about old-fashioned traditional parenting is going to completely change, and it shouldn't completely change. Things like, sleep schedules or eating healthy, or, curfew times, which was strict when we were children, are necessary for children. They are necessary for their safety and their growth and their development till the time they're able to handle these decisions better. But we can bring changes in other areas like conversation and warmth and openness and no judgment and no shaming, and giving kids freedom to explore and discover who they are.
Well, we have talked about raising a child. How about raising a child to be a reader? It has become a very difficult dream in today's world, especially given the onslaught of screens. So, what will be on your wish list? How close do you think we at Bookbibuli are in achieving that holistic habitat to raise readers?
How about raising a child as a reader? Even before I had Ahmad, I had this dream that we'd both, whichever child I had, and we'd both snuggle up in bed, and we'd both, read together. And that did happen for the longest time. And the only thing I'd say to parent is, if you want your children to read more, don't give them the phone, at least till they're in high school. Don't give them smartphones, at least. And that's like a joke because I gave my son a smartphone, but like I said earlier, I am revising that position. I don't think it's the power and the pull of this device and all devices is so strong that it neurologically changes how a child's brain is, and they will not want to read as much because it doesn't give them that dopamine hit, right? So the lesser number of devices there are in your home, and the lesser you're using devices and more using books and other tactile, things available, the more the chances of you reading as a family, and therefore your child reading with you, increases. So I used to say to all parents, and I've done this myself, and I see my sisters doing them now that they have toddlers, is that read to them as soon as they can sit. And my sisters even started reading to her baby boy as soon as he was born, and now he's not even 2 and he wants to pick up books. But then tech use in their family is next to nothing, and he's not allowed to touch phones, and he won't have a phone till probably he's 15 or 16. So if you want your kids to be a reader, read to them, let them choose as they're older their own books. And I don't know about a wish list really. I mean, because all of these things are changing so rapidly. But I do feel that now, say if I had an opportunity to teach a younger one now, I would bring in so much more of our Indian sort of literature that is blossoming so beautifully. And back when Imad was young, say 16 years ago, all you could find were these books by authors outside. So I would say maybe have like Oliver Jeffers, or the Gruffalo series when he was a baby, and then it moved on to say other cheekier, naughtier stuff. And but there were not so many indie books available, but I see that now. So I think that would definitely be on my wish list. And beautiful illustrated drawings, and books that you can read throughout your life, books that you can pick up as a child, and you can pick up as an adult, and you can pick up as a 70-year-old and still feel warm and comforted by. And I think in that sense, Bookbibuli is doing such a beautiful job in just getting authors and books from a very wide spectrum. So you do books from India, you do books from other places, and you do stories. And it doesn't matter where they come from or who it is. There are new authors, there are old authors, there are well-published authors, and there are first-timers like me. So I think you're doing a fantastic job also through this podcast and through whatever it is that your events and your meetups, and you yourself, how you've been really involved in children's literature. And I think that's really beautiful. That's commendable. I don't know how you do it all, but it's amazing.
Thank you so much, Reema, for the kind words. And the last question. From your days at LSR to today, the entrance process has changed so much. Now one has to go through CUET, which has reading comprehension as one section. The same is true for most of the aptitude tests. You take it SAT, CLAT, CAT, all have significant weightage on reading comprehension. So much so that it can be the difference between selection and rejection. But do you think that one can become good at reading by attending a crash course? How can a student get better at reading? Especially if they are vying for admission in a leading national or international university.
Yeah, that's a very interesting one, Richa. I really don't think we can become good at reading by attending a crash course. I think crash courses can help you with grammar, they can help you with your diction a little bit, they can help you with comprehension a little bit, but I think it takes a long time of reading, and reading very diversely through various books from different cultures, books from different perspectives also. So when we were reading as young people, say as young adults, we were exposed to a lot of what one would now call white male literature, right? Because that was the canon back then. But as we grew older, we were also reading a lot of translation, or at least I was reading a lot of translation. Maybe that's because there are a lot of family members from different parts of the country and even different parts of the world. So that made me curious. And I think when one does that, it brings about an eagerness in your ear, where how you listen to people, how you listen to their stories, because there are these wide-ranging ideas and things that you are exposed to, and it awakens curiosity like nothing else does. And that takes time. That cannot be achieved in, say, a 2 or 3 month crash course. That takes years and years of your life, and also having read through different stages of your life. So when you read as a child, it would be different. When you read as an adolescent, it would be different. When you read as a teen, it would be different, right? So, and that is what brings the nuance to reading, which is essentially, a way of looking at the world and a way of examining yourself. And that way takes time to develop. However, I wouldn't say that there is no hope for people who've taken up reading late in life. For students, I would suggest that if you want to get better at reading, and for admission purposes, start with good magazines, and like intellectual magazines or even news magazines which have shorter pieces. So if you start with, say, shorter pieces, your ability to stop and understand and to revise your opinion, you are less likely to put down a shorter piece than you are. You'd be more likely to put down a bigger book, say a novel or something. So start with short stories, start with essays, start with news pieces, start with opinion pieces. Those are great way to become familiar with reading. And nonfiction for a lot of people feels easier. So informal nonfiction feels easier than, say, magical realism or fiction like that, which can be a little tough in the beginning. So start with that, and start with an awareness that you are a learner and you wish to be that. There was this exercise our grade 11 teacher Mrs. Govish used to make us do, and we would be very frustrated at that time. But I think that really dramatically improved the way that I read. Was she would make us mark words that we didn't understand, terminology that we didn't understand, in a notebook, in a separate notebook, and we had to go back and research. And of course, there were no phones then, so you had to pick up a dictionary, and you had to create sentences around that. You had to create scenarios around that. And that, comprehension is such a big part of reading that really helps you. And we'd go back and forth and discuss. So I would also say reading in a group is a great activity where you can lend each other information, where you can learn from each other. And that really helps your awareness of, your sensory acuity to really, really grow. So read in groups, create a reading group, whatever age you are. And if you're, trying for an entrance exam, look for people who are trying for a similar entrance exam, and do a group together, do reading sessions together, and that keeps you motivated. That also, group learning is good. The other way you can, of course, learn is to challenge yourself, is to pick up things that you find difficult and stay with them. And I know that's hard, especially given the way our brains are now wired to, persist only with things that give pleasure. So that's something I would really recommend for, young people, is to challenge yourself and keep at it. Keep at it. It gets better and better. Don't give up reading. Don't get attached to your phones. Give yourself like a phone-free Sunday every week. So your brain is trained to be bored. The more it is trained to be bored and not do anything that is very stimulating, the better you will be at reading. Because if you're overstimulated, your brain tends to just want that and want that and want that, and not things that feel simpler or slower or quote unquote boring. And that's a change that I've seen in even myself as I've started using the phone and tech more, that reading is now harder. And that's something you'll hear from a lot of people, that reading is harder and our attention spans are smaller. So that has a lot to do with, neurological rewiring. Reward yourself with a new book every time you finish 4 or 5 books. That's something I used to do for myself. I used to borrow books, and then when I'd done with 4 or 5 books, I would reward myself with one book through saved pocket money, or I would ask someone to, give it to me for my birthday or something like that. And that kept the excitement going. Read what you like. Don't go by what other people saying should be read, but do try to look for different kinds of voices. Go for an informal voice, go for a more critical voice, go for a slightly more complex use of grammar or language. And variety keeps that kind of interest alive. And then there are, of course, specialized courses and specialized books that help one read better. And a thesaurus, I feel, really helped me developing, vocabulary in that sense. But yeah, I don't know. I hope that helps.
Thank you so much, Reema, for the wonderful conversation. We loved having you with us.
It has been lovely, lovely doing this podcast with you, Richa. Thank you so much for the opportunity. It's just been lovely.
And to the rest of you listeners, until next week, better read, read better.